The blood pooling beneath the wagon wheel was the first thing Daisy Turner noticed when she stumbled into Paso Robles, California, that scorching August afternoon in 1873, and her screams split the air before anyone could stop her. The townspeople rushed from the general store and saloon, their faces twisted with concern until they saw what she was pointing at, a dead rattlesnake crushed under iron and wood, nothing more. Her mother's wail rose above the dust and heat like a coyote's cry. "She's touched in the head," Martha Turner shrieked, gripping her daughter's arm hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises. "Lord forgive me, but my own flesh and blood ain't right, sees things that aren't there, screams at shadows, talks to people who died years back." Daisy felt the familiar shame wash over her, hot as the California sun beating down on her bonnet. She was 22 years old, and her mother had been saying such things since she was a girl of 8. The incident with the fire, when Daisy swore she saw her little brother trapped in the barn, screaming and running in circles while everyone else saw only flames. They found him later, safe in the creek a half-mile away, catching tadpoles. But the damage to Daisy's reputation had been done that day and every day since. The crowd dispersed with uncomfortable glances and whispered words. Paso Robles was a small town carved into the rolling hills of California's central coast, where the sun baked the earth golden and the oaks grew twisted and ancient. It was not a place where oddity was welcomed or understood. Martha Turner had brought her daughter here, hoping distance from their previous home in Sacramento might offer a fresh start. But within 10 minutes of arrival, that hope had shattered like glass. "Come along," Martha hissed, dragging Daisy toward the boarding house. "Keep your eyes down and your mouth shut. Maybe we can salvage something of this disaster." Daisy followed silently, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had learned years ago that explaining herself only made things worse. How could she tell anyone that she didn't see things that weren't there, but rather felt them? Sensed danger before it struck, perceived emotions in colors that swirled around people like smoke, heard the whisper of coming storms days before the clouds gathered. The world was alive to her in ways it seemed dead to everyone else, and that made her strange. Touched in the head. Mad. The boarding house was run by a severe woman named Mrs. Crawford, who took Martha's money with thin lips and narrowed eyes. "I run a respectable establishment," she said pointedly. "No disturbances." "There won't be any," Martha promised, shooting Daisy a warning glare. Their room was small and stifling, with a single window that looked out onto the main street. Daisy stood at that window while her mother unpacked their meager belongings, watching the town move below. Paso Robles was growing, she could see that. New buildings being raised, more people arriving each week seeking land and opportunity. The Central Pacific Railroad had changed everything, bringing civilization and commerce to places that had been wild just years before. She saw him then, riding into town on a horse so large it made other mounts look like ponies. The man himself was massive, broad-shouldered and thick-muscled, his hair dark and long enough to brush his collar. He wore buckskin and leather, and even from a distance, Daisy could see the way he moved, fluid and careful, like a cougar she had once watched in the Sierra Nevada foothills. There was something about him that made her breath catch, though she couldn't have said why. "Stop gawking!" Martha snapped. "Come away from that window!" But Daisy watched as the mountain man dismounted in front of the general store, his movements economical and sure. Several townspeople nodded to him with what looked like respect. He disappeared inside the store, and Daisy finally turned away, a strange warmth in her chest that felt like hope, though hope for what she couldn't name. That evening, Martha insisted they take supper in the boarding house dining room. "We need to show them you're normal," she said, fussing with Daisy's hair. "Smile but don't talk much. Agree with whatever anyone says. For the love of heaven, don't mention anything strange." The dining room held 6 other guests, all men except for an elderly woman who introduced herself as Miss Adelaide Marsh, a school teacher. The conversation was polite and careful until one of the men, a banker named Stewart, mentioned trouble with bandits on the northern road. "3 wagons hit in the last month," he said, shaking his head. "The sheriff is useless. We need someone who knows the wilderness who can track these criminals." "Someone like Hawthorne Mackenzie," another man suggested. "I saw him ride in today. If anyone could find those bandits, it would be him." Daisy's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Hawthorne Mackenzie. The mountain man. She felt that strange pull again, like a rope tugging at her center. That wild man, Mrs. Crawford sniffed. He's barely civilized himself. Lives up in the mountains like an animal. Only comes to town for supplies every few months. Wild, maybe, but honorable, the first man countered. He helped settle that dispute between the Campbell Ranch and the Moreno family last year. Kept it from turning into bloodshed. I heard he killed a grizzly bear with just a knife, someone else added. That's just a story, Stewart said, but there was doubt in his voice. Daisy felt the colors swirling around the room shift and darken. Fear, anxiety, hope, all tangled together. She opened her mouth without thinking. He could do it. Every eye turned to her. Martha's face went white. I beg your pardon, Mrs. Crawford said icily. Daisy swallowed hard. I mean, he seems capable. If anyone could help with the bandits, someone with experience in the wilderness would be the right choice. And what would you know about it? Mrs. Crawford challenged. Nothing, Martha said quickly, her hand clamping down on Daisy's wrist under the table. She knows nothing. She's just agreeing with what the men said. Isn't that right, Daisy? Yes, Mama, Daisy whispered, her face burning. The conversation moved on, but the damage was done. Daisy could feel the suspicion in the room, the way people's eyes kept sliding toward her when they thought she wasn't looking. She excused herself as soon as possible and fled to the room, her mother's angry footsteps following close behind. What did I tell you? Martha demanded once the door was closed. What did I specifically tell you? I'm sorry, Mama, it just came out. Everything with you just comes out. You have no control, no sense. Do you know how hard I've worked to keep a roof over our heads? Do you know how many towns we've had to leave because of your strangeness? Daisy did know. 6 towns in 14 years. Each time the same pattern. At first, people were kind, willing to give the odd girl the benefit of the doubt. Then, something would happen. Daisy would know about an accident before it occurred, would sense a sickness in someone days before symptoms showed, would react to things invisible to others. And then would come the whispers, the fear, the isolation. Her mother would pack their bags in the dead of night, and they would start again somewhere new. I'm trying, Daisy said, tears stinging her eyes. I truly am trying, Mama. Try harder, Martha said, her voice breaking. I'm getting old, Daisy. I won't be able to take care of you forever. You need to find a husband, someone who can provide for you when I'm gone. But no man will marry a woman who's touched in the head. You need to be normal. The word normal hung in the air like a noose. Daisy had spent her entire life trying to be something she wasn't, trying to ignore the gifts or curses that made her different. It was exhausting, like trying to hold her breath underwater. Eventually, she always had to come up for air, and when she did, disaster followed. That night, she couldn't sleep. The heat was oppressive, and through the thin walls she could hear other guests snoring and moving about. She rose finally and went to the window, pushing it open wider to catch any hint of breeze. The street below was dark, except for lamplight spilling from the saloon. As she watched, a figure emerged from the shadows, and she recognized the mountain man, Hawthorne Mackenzie, leading his horse toward the livery stable. He moved through the darkness like he was part of it, comfortable and unafraid. Daisy felt that pull again, stronger this time. Before she could think better of it, she was pulling on her dress and shoes, moving as quietly as possible so as not to wake her mother. She slipped down the stairs and out the back door of the boarding house into the warm California night. The street was empty, everyone tucked away in their beds or drinking in the saloon. Daisy hurried toward the livery stable, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. What was she doing? What did she think would happen? But her feet carried her forward anyway, drawn by something she couldn't name or resist. The stable was dark and smelled of hay and horses. She could hear the animals shifting in their stalls, the creak of leather, the sound of someone moving in the shadows. She stepped inside, her eyes struggling to adjust. You shouldn't be here, a deep voice said from the darkness, and Daisy nearly jumped out of her skin. Hawthorne Mackenzie emerged from a stall, and even in the dim light from the single lantern hanging near the door, he was imposing. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his shoulders broad enough to block out the light behind him. His face was weathered and strong, with dark eyes that seemed to see right through her. His hair was indeed long, tied back with a leather cord, and his arms, bare to the elbow, were corded with muscle. I know, Daisy said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I don't know why I came." He studied her for a long moment, and Daisy felt something shift in the air between them. The colors that usually swirled around people were different with him, calmer, deeper, like the blue of deep water or the green of ancient forests. There was no fear in him, no judgment, just a steady curiosity. "You're the girl from the boarding house," he said, "the one who screamed about the snake." Shame flooded through her, hot and familiar. "Yes, everyone thinks I'm mad." "Are you?" The question was asked without mockery, as if he genuinely wanted to know. Daisy found herself answering honestly for the first time in years. "No, at least, I don't think so. I just see the world differently than other people, feel things they don't feel. It frightens them." Hawthorne nodded slowly. "The world's a frightening place for most folks. They don't like what they can't understand or control. And you? I stopped trying to control anything a long time ago. Life's easier that way." He turned back to his horse, checking the animal's hooves with practiced efficiency. Daisy should have left then, should have hurried back to the boarding house before her mother woke and found her gone. But she stayed, watching him work, feeling more at peace than she had in months. "What's it like?" she asked. "Living in the mountains?" "Quiet, honest. The animals don't lie, and the weather doesn't pretend to be something it's not." He glanced at her. "Why do you ask?" "It sounds wonderful. It's hard, cold in winter, isolated all the time. Most people couldn't stand it. Most people have never had an entire town turn against them." Hawthorne straightened, his gaze sharpening. "Is that what happened to you?" "It's what always happens to me. We just got here today, and already everyone knows I'm strange. My mother is ashamed of me. She brought me here hoping I could find a husband, but what man would want a wife who sees things that aren't there?" "Do you see things that aren't there?" Daisy hesitated, then shook her head. "I see things that are there, but that other people can't perceive. Emotions like colors, danger before it strikes, the truth of people's hearts. My mother says I'm touched in the head, but I think I'm just touched differently. That doesn't sound like madness to me. Sounds like a gift." The words hit Daisy like a physical blow. A gift. No one had ever called it that. She felt tears spring to her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "I should go," she managed. "I'm sorry for disturbing you." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "What's your name?" "Daisy. Daisy Turner." "Daisy." He said it like he was tasting the word, seeing if it fit. "I'm Hawthorne Mackenzie, but I suppose you already know that." "Yes. They say you killed a grizzly bear with just a knife." The corner of his mouth quirked up, not quite a smile, but close. "They say a lot of things. Some of them are even true." "Is that one true?" "The bear was wounded and suffering. I put it out of its misery. But the story sounds better the other way." Daisy found herself almost smiling. "Thank you. For not treating me like I'm broken. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're just not meant to fit into their neat little boxes." She left then, slipping back through the dark streets to the boarding house. Her mother was still asleep, snoring softly in her bed. Daisy lay down and stared at the ceiling, her mind spinning. Something had happened in that stable, something important. Hawthorne Mackenzie had looked at her and seen a person, not a problem. For the first time in her life, she had felt understood. The next morning, Martha dragged Daisy to church services. Paso Robles had a small white church at the edge of town, and the congregation filled the pews with starched dresses and severe expressions. The preacher was a thin man named Reverend Hollis, who spoke at length about sin and righteousness and the importance of conforming to God's will. Daisy sat through it all with her hands folded in her lap, trying to look as normal as possible. After the service, Martha pushed her toward a group of young women standing in the churchyard. "Make friends," she hissed. "Show them you're just like them." But Daisy wasn't like them. She could feel it in the way they looked at her, in the careful distance they kept. One of them, a pretty blonde named Caroline, smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. "We heard about your arrival yesterday," Caroline said. "It must have been quite a journey from Sacramento." "It was long," Daisy said carefully. "And you're here looking for a husband?" The bluntness of the question made Daisy's cheeks burn. "My mother hopes I might settle here, yes." "Well, there aren't many unmarried men in Paso Robles. Most of the good ones are already spoken for." Caroline's smile sharpened. "Though I suppose some people aren't as particular as others." The insult was veiled, but clear. Daisy felt anger rise in her chest, hot and fierce. The colors around Caroline swirled red and black, jealousy and cruelty mixed together. Before Daisy could respond, a commotion near the church entrance drew everyone's attention. Hawthorne Mackenzie had arrived, and he stood out among the townspeople like a wolf among sheep. He wasn't dressed for church, still wearing his buckskin and leather, his long hair loose around his shoulders. Several people gasped, and Reverend Hollis hurried forward with an expression of concern. "Mr. Mackenzie," the Reverend said, "we weren't expecting you. Have you come for services?" "No," Hawthorne said, his deep voice carrying across the churchyard. "I came to talk to the men about the bandit problem. Heard you folks have been having trouble." "Perhaps that's a conversation better had elsewhere," Reverend Hollis suggested, glancing nervously at the women and children. "Perhaps," Hawthorne agreed, but his eyes scanned the crowd and landed on Daisy. Something flickered in his expression, recognition, and something else, something that made her breath catch. Then he turned away, following several men toward the sheriff's office, and the moment was broken. "Did you see the way he looked at you?" Caroline whispered, her voice dripping with false concern. "How unseemly. That savage mountain man staring at a respectable woman." "He wasn't staring," Daisy said quietly. "He was just looking." "It's the same thing," another girl chimed in. "My father says Hawthorne Mackenzie is dangerous. He's killed men before." "I heard he was married once to an Indian woman," Caroline added. "Can you imagine, living like a savage up in those mountains?" Daisy felt her hands clench into fists. The colors around these women were ugly, full of fear and prejudice and small-minded cruelty. She wanted to defend Hawthorne, to tell them they knew nothing about him, but her mother's warning glance stopped her. Instead, she excused herself and walked away, her heart pounding with frustration. She spent the afternoon helping her mother with mending work. Martha had arranged to take in sewing from some of the wealthier families in town, and their small room quickly filled with dresses and shirts needing repair. It was tedious work, and Daisy's mind wandered as her needle moved through fabric. She kept thinking about Hawthorne, about the way he had spoken to her in the stable, the respect in his voice. No one had treated her that way before, like her thoughts and feelings mattered. Even her own mother saw her as a burden, something to be managed and hidden away. But Hawthorne had looked at her and seen something different, something valuable. 3 days passed. Daisy fell into a routine of helping her mother with sewing during the day and avoiding the other townspeople as much as possible. She had given up on making friends. The story of her screaming about the snake had spread and grown more dramatic with each telling. Now people said she had fainted, or thrown herself to the ground, or claimed the devil was chasing her. None of it was true, but truth mattered less than a good story. On the 4th day, Hawthorne Mackenzie rode out of town with a group of men, heading north to track the bandits. Daisy watched from her window as they left, and she felt a strange sense of loss, as if something important was being taken away. Her mother noticed her watching and frowned. "Stay away from that mountain man," Martha warned. "He's not for the likes of you." "What do you mean?" "He's wild, Daisy, uncivilized. You need someone stable, someone who can provide a proper home, not some savage who lives in a cave." "He doesn't live in a cave," Daisy said, "and he's more civilized than most of the people in this town. At least he's honest." Martha's eyes narrowed. "Have you been talking to him?" "Once, briefly. It was nothing." "It better stay nothing. I won't have you throwing yourself at the first man who shows you any attention. You'll end up with child and abandoned, and then where will we be?" The accusation stung, not least because it was so unfair. Daisy had never thrown herself at any man. She had barely spoken to men at all, too aware of her reputation, too afraid of causing more trouble. But her mother saw threats everywhere, and Daisy was tired of defending herself against crimes she hadn't committed. The men returned 5 days later, dusty and exhausted but triumphant. They had found the bandit camp and recovered most of the stolen goods. The bandits themselves had fled across the county line, but at least the immediate threat was gone. The town celebrated with a dance at the community hall, and Martha insisted Daisy attend. "This is your chance," Martha said, pinning Daisy's hair into a respectable bun. "Everyone will be in a good mood. Maybe someone will ask you to dance, and you can show them you're a normal, pleasant young woman." Daisy doubted that would happen, but she put on her best dress, a faded blue cotton that had been pretty once, and followed her mother to the hall. The building was packed with people, the air thick with heat and the smell of bodies and perfume. A fiddler and guitarist played in the corner, and couples spun across the floor in energetic reels. Daisy found a spot against the wall and tried to make herself invisible. She watched the dancers, feeling the emotions in the room wash over her like waves. Joy, excitement, desire, jealousy, all swirling together in a dizzying mix. It was overwhelming, and she closed her eyes, trying to find some quiet space inside herself. "You look like you're in pain." Her eyes flew open. Hawthorne Mackenzie stood beside her, and up close, he was even more imposing than she remembered. He'd cleaned up for the dance, his hair freshly washed and tied back, his buckskin shirt traded for a cotton one that stretched tight across his massive shoulders and chest. But he still looked out of place among the townspeople, too big, too wild, too real. "I'm fine," Daisy managed, "just warm." "It's hot as hell in here," he agreed. "Why do people pack themselves into buildings like cattle?" "Because it's civilized," Daisy said, and heard the bitterness in her own voice. Hawthorne's mouth quirked. "That word again. I'm starting to think civilization is overrated." "My mother would disagree with you." "Most mothers would." He glanced around the room, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. "I heard some women talking about you at the general store. Said you were strange, that you see things." Daisy's stomach clenched. "And what do you think?" "I think people talk too much and think too little." He looked back at her, and his expression softened. "I also think you look miserable. Would you like to step outside for some air?" Every instinct told her to say no. Her mother would be furious. The townspeople would gossip. It would only make her reputation worse. But Daisy was so tired of doing what she was supposed to do, of being who everyone else wanted her to be. And Hawthorne was looking at her like she was a person, not a problem. "Yes," she said, "I would." They slipped out the back door of the hall into the cool evening air. The sun had set, and the sky was deepening to purple, stars beginning to emerge. Paso Robles sprawled around them, small and temporary looking under the vast California sky. In the distance, the dark shapes of mountains rose against the horizon. "Better?" Hawthorne asked. "Much?" Daisy breathed deeply, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease. "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me. I wanted an excuse to escape too." He leaned against the wall of the building, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "That's not your world in there." "It's supposed to be. My mother wants me to fit in, to find a husband, to be normal." "There's that word again. What else should I call it?" "I don't know. Different, maybe. Unique. You're not broken just because you don't fit their mold." Daisy felt tears threaten again. She had cried more in the past week than she had in years, and she hated the weakness of it. But something about Hawthorne's quiet acceptance undid all her defenses. "I've spent my whole life trying to fit in," she said, "trying to be what everyone else wanted. And I've failed every single time. Maybe my mother is right. Maybe I'm touched in the head." "Your mother is afraid," Hawthorne said. "Fear makes people cruel, even to the ones they love. She's trying to protect you the only way she knows how." "By making me hate myself?" "By trying to make you small enough that the world won't notice you and hurt you. But that's not protection. That's just a slower kind of death." His words hung in the air between them, true and terrible. Daisy looked at him, this massive man who seemed utterly comfortable in his own skin, who moved through the world without apology or explanation. "How did you become so wise?" she asked. Hawthorne laughed, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "I'm not wise. I've just made enough mistakes to know what doesn't work. I spent years trying to be what my father wanted, what society expected. Nearly killed me. When I finally walked away and started living on my own terms, I found peace." "But you're alone?" "Alone isn't the same as lonely, and I'm not always alone. I have friends among the mountain tribes, trading partners, people I trust. It's a different kind of life, but it's mine." "It sounds wonderful," Daisy said wistfully. "It has its challenges. Winter in the mountains is brutal. Supplies run low. The cold seeps into your bones. And there are dangers, predators both animal and human. But I wake up every morning free, and that's worth all the hardship." Before Daisy could respond, the back door burst open, and her mother appeared, her face white with fury. "Daisy Turner, get inside this instant!" Mama, I was just getting some air. With him? Martha pointed at Hawthorne like he was something diseased. Have you lost your mind completely? Mrs. Turner, Hawthorne said calmly, we were just talking. I assure you your daughter's reputation is safe. Her reputation is already ruined, thanks to her own strangeness. She doesn't need help from the likes of you. Martha grabbed Daisy's arm and yanked her toward the door. We're leaving. Now. Daisy stumbled after her mother, but she looked back at Hawthorne. His expression was unreadable in the shadows, but she thought she saw understanding in his eyes. Then the door closed between them, and Martha was dragging her through the hall, past staring faces and whispered comments out into the street. What were you thinking? Martha demanded once they were back in their room. Sneaking off with that savage? Do you want to be completely unmarriageable? I'm already unmarriageable, Mama. You said so yourself. Martha's hand flew up and connected with Daisy's cheek, the slap sharp and shocking. They both froze. Martha had never hit her before, not in 22 years. Tears spilled down Martha's face. God forgive me, she whispered. I don't know what to do with you anymore, Daisy. I'm trying so hard to help you, and you fight me at every turn. Daisy touched her stinging cheek, her own eyes wet. You're not trying to help me. You're trying to break me into a shape that fits your expectations. But I can't be what you want, Mama. I've tried, and I can't. Then what will become of you? Martha's voice broke. I'm 53 years old. My health isn't good. What happens when I die and you're alone with no husband, no family, no means of support? You'll end up in an asylum or on the streets. The fear in her mother's voice was real, and Daisy felt her anger deflate. Martha wasn't cruel. She was terrified, trying to secure her daughter's future the only way she knew how. But that didn't make her methods any less suffocating. I don't know what will become of me, Daisy said quietly. But I know I can't keep living like this, ashamed of who I am, hiding my true self. It's killing me from the inside out. Better that than dead on the outside, Martha said bitterly. You're young. You don't understand how hard the world is for women alone. Then teach me. Teach me skills. Teach me how to survive on my own. Don't just try to marry me off to the first man who'll have me. But Martha shook her head, defeated. Go to bed. We'll talk about this in the morning. There was no more talk in the morning. Martha woke with a fever, her face flushed and her breathing labored. Daisy ran for the doctor, her heart pounding with fear. Dr. Pemberton was an elderly man with kind eyes and steady hands. He examined Martha thoroughly, then drew Daisy aside. It's pneumonia, he said. Her lungs are weak. Has she been ill before? She had a bad cough last winter that never fully went away. Doctor. Pemberton nodded gravely. She needs rest and care. I'll leave medicine, but you'll need to watch her closely. Pneumonia can turn serious quickly, especially in someone of her age and condition. The next week was a blur of worry and exhaustion. Daisy barely left her mother's side, bathing her fevered skin, coaxing her to eat, administering the bitter medicine the doctor had left. Martha drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes delirious. In her delirium, she spoke of Daisy's father, dead these 15 years, and of Daisy as a child, bright and strange and beloved. I'm sorry, Martha whispered one night, gripping Daisy's hand with surprising strength. I was so afraid for you. The world is cruel to women who are different. I just wanted to protect you. I know, Mama, Daisy said, tears streaming down her face. I know. Mrs. Crawford brought soup and bread, her stern demeanor softening in the face of genuine illness. Even some of the women from church came by with offers of help. Miss Adelaide, the schoolteacher, sat with Martha for hours one afternoon so Daisy could rest, and through it all, Daisy felt the familiar curse of her gift. She could sense her mother's life force flickering like a candle in the wind, and she knew with cold certainty that Martha Turner was dying. On the 9th day, Hawthorne Mackenzie appeared at the boarding house door. Mrs. Crawford tried to turn him away, but he was insistent. I heard Mrs. Turner was ill, he said. I have medicines from the mountains, herbs and remedies the tribal healers use. They might help. Mrs. Crawford looked doubtful, but Daisy appeared at the top of the stairs. Let him in, she said. Please. Hawthorne climbed the stairs, his bulk seeming to fill the narrow hallway. In the small room, he looked enormous, but he moved with surprising gentleness as he approached Martha's bed. She was asleep, her breathing raspy and labored. How long has she been like this? He asked. 9 days. The doctor's medicine isn't working. Hawthorne opened a leather pouch and pulled out several bundles of dried herbs. This is yerba santa. The Spanish call it holy herb. It's good for lung ailments. And this is asha root, helps with fever and infection. The tribes have been using these medicines for generations. He showed Daisy how to prepare the herbs, crushing and steeping them into a strong tea. The smell was sharp and medicinal, nothing like the doctor's sweet syrup. They waited for Martha to wake, and when she did, Daisy helped her drink the tea. Martha grimaced at the taste, but swallowed obediently. "Who's that?" she asked, her eyes focusing on Hawthorne with difficulty. "The mountain man, Mama. He brought medicine to help you." "Don't trust him," Martha mumbled. "Don't trust any man." But her eyes closed again, and she slipped back into sleep. Hawthorne left the herbs with instructions and told Daisy to send for him if she needed anything. She watched him go, feeling that strange pull again, stronger than ever. Over the next 3 days, Martha's condition slowly improved. The herbs seemed to break the fever and ease her breathing. Dr. Pemberton came by, examined her, and pronounced himself cautiously optimistic. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," he said. "She's not out of danger yet, but she's fighting." On the 15th day, Martha sat up and ate solid food for the first time. Her color was better, and her eyes were clear. She looked at Daisy with something like wonder. "You took care of me," she said. "You didn't leave." "Of course I didn't leave, Mama. You're my mother. I've been so hard on you. I thought I was helping, but I see now that I was only hurting you. Can you forgive me?" Daisy felt a lump in her throat. "There's nothing to forgive. You did what you thought was best." "It wasn't best. I was afraid of your gifts, afraid of what people would think. I made you ashamed of yourself, and that was wrong. You're different, Daisy. But different doesn't mean broken." Tears rolled down Martha's thin cheeks. "You're my daughter, and you're extraordinary." It was the first time Martha had said such a thing, and Daisy broke down completely, sobbing against her mother's shoulder. They held each other and cried, years of pain and misunderstanding flowing out in salt and water. "The mountain man brought the herbs that saved me, didn't he?" Martha asked when they had both calmed. "Yes, Hawthorne Mackenzie. He came to help even though I was cruel to him." Martha shook her head slowly. "I judged him wrongly. He's a good man." "Yes," Daisy said softly. "He is. You care for him." It wasn't a question, and Daisy didn't try to deny it. "I barely know him, but yes, I care for him. He's the first person who's ever seen me as I truly am and not turned away." Martha was quiet for a long moment. "Then perhaps you should tell him that." "Mama, I can't. He's leaving soon, going back to the mountains, and I can't leave you, not while you're still recovering. I'm getting stronger every day, and Mrs. Crawford has offered to look after me. She's not as hard as she pretends to be." Martha took Daisy's hand. "I've kept you prisoner your whole life, telling you what to be and who to love. I won't do that anymore. If this man makes you happy, if he sees the real you and values it, then you should tell him, before it's too late." Daisy's heart raced. The thought of telling Hawthorne how she felt was terrifying. What if he didn't feel the same? What if he saw her as just another lost soul, someone to help and then forget? But the alternative, letting him leave without knowing, seemed worse. "I'll think about it," she promised. That evening she went for a walk, needing air and space to think. Her feet carried her to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to rolling hills and oak trees. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She stood watching the colors shift and change, thinking about her mother's words, about Hawthorne, about the future. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She spun around. Hawthorne stood a few yards away, his horse grazing nearby. He must have been out riding and seen her standing alone. "Yes," she managed, "very beautiful." He came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. They watched the sunset in silence for a while, the moment stretching between them like something sacred. "Your mother is better," he said finally. "I'm glad. Thanks to you. The herbs you brought saved her life. The medicine helped, but you saved her. You didn't give up, didn't let fear or exhaustion stop you. That took courage. I don't feel courageous. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite fear. You have more of it than you know." Daisy turned to look at him and found he was already watching her. His dark eyes were intense, and she felt that pull again, like gravity, like coming home. I don't want you to leave, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I know you're going back to the mountains soon, and I know you barely know me. But I don't want you to go. Hawthorne's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Why? Because you make me feel like I matter, like who I am is enough, exactly as I am. I've never felt that before with anyone. She took a shaky breath. My mother said I'm touched in the head, but you make me feel like maybe I just touch the world differently. And that's not wrong. It's just different. You do touch the world differently, Hawthorne said, his voice low and rough. And you touch my heart just fine. The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Daisy felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were good tears, tears of relief and joy. Hawthorne reached out and cupped her face in his massive calloused hand, his thumb brushing away the moisture on her cheek. I've been alone a long time, he said. Told myself I preferred it that way. But then I met you and I started thinking about what it would be like to share my life with someone, to have a partner who understood me, who wasn't afraid of silence or wilderness or hard truths. I'm not afraid of any of those things, Daisy whispered. I know. That's why I'm asking you to come with me, to the mountains, to my home. It won't be easy and it won't be anything like the life your mother wanted for you. But it will be real. And it will be ours. Daisy's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. You want me to come with you? Only if you want to come. I won't pressure you or force you. But yes, Daisy Turner, I want you to come with me. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to show you my world and learn everything about yours. I want to build a life together, if you'll have me. Yes, Daisy said, and then louder, yes. Hawthorne pulled her into his arms, and she felt the solid strength of him, the realness of his body against hers. He smelled like leather and pine and wood smoke, like the mountains themselves. When he kissed her, it was gentle despite his size, his lips soft against hers, asking permission. She kissed him back with all the longing and hope that had been building in her for weeks, for years, for her entire life. They stood there as the sun set completely and the stars emerged, holding each other under the vast California sky. Finally, Hawthorne pulled back, his hands still on her shoulders. There are things you should know, he said. Practical things. My cabin is a 2-day ride into the mountains. It's isolated, miles from the nearest neighbor. Winter is harsh and sometimes we'll be snowed in for weeks at a time. We'll have to hunt and trap and preserve food to survive. It's a hard life, Daisy. I'm not afraid of hard work. And there's my past. I was married before, to a Chumash woman named Ayana. She died in childbirth 5 years ago, along with our daughter. I loved them, and their loss nearly destroyed me. I need you to know that. Daisy saw the pain in his eyes and understood it intimately. She had lost people too, had felt grief's sharp teeth. I'm sorry. That must have been unbearable. It was. I buried them in the mountains and thought I'd never love anyone again. But then I met you, and I realized my heart wasn't dead, just sleeping. I promised to honor her memory, Daisy said, and to never try to replace her. You couldn't replace her. You're your own person, unique and irreplaceable. He smiled slightly. She would have liked you, I think. She had her own gifts, her own way of seeing the world. The Chumash respected such things, didn't fear them like white society does. Will they accept me, your Chumash friends? They'll judge you by your actions, not your background. If you treat them with respect, they'll return it. They talked for hours, working through the practicalities and possibilities. Hawthorne explained his life in detail, holding nothing back. He made a modest living from trapping and trading furs, occasionally guiding hunting parties or helping settlers find good land. It wasn't a wealthy life, but it was sufficient. His cabin was small but well-built, with a creek nearby for water and good hunting grounds all around. I'll need to tell my mother, Daisy said finally. She deserves to know. Of course. And if she objects, if she needs you to stay with her longer while she heals, I can wait. I've waited this long for someone like you. I can wait a little longer. But when Daisy returned to the boarding house and told Martha everything, her mother surprised her once again. Instead of objecting or weeping, Martha smiled through her tears. I knew this was coming, she said. I could see it in the way you looked at each other. And I'm glad, Daisy, Truly glad. You deserve happiness, and you deserve someone who loves you for who you are. But what about you, Mama? I can't leave you alone and sick. I'm not alone. Mrs. Crawford has offered me a permanent room here in exchange for help with the sewing and housekeeping. It's a good arrangement, and Paso Robles is a pleasant enough town. I'll be fine, Daisy. Better than fine, because I'll know my daughter is happy. They held each other and cried again, but this time the tears were bittersweet, full of sorrow and joy mixed together. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Martha gave Daisy her grandmother's wedding ring, a simple gold band that fit perfectly. Mrs. Crawford contributed a warm wool coat and sturdy boots. Miss Adelaide brought books, saying every home needed a library, no matter how small. The whole town seemed to know about the engagement, and opinions were divided. Some thought Daisy was making a terrible mistake, throwing her life away on a wild man. Others were more generous, wishing her well and offering gifts of preserves and seeds for her new garden. Caroline and her friends sniffed and said Daisy was getting exactly what she deserved, a life of hardship with a savage. But Daisy found she didn't care anymore what those small-minded women thought. Reverend Hollis married them in the small church on a bright September morning. Martha stood as witness, her eyes wet but her smile genuine. A few townspeople attended, including Dr. Pemberton and Miss Adelaide. Daisy wore a simple dress of cream cotton that Martha had made, and Hawthorne wore clean buckskin and a blue cotton shirt that brought out the warmth in his dark eyes. When Reverend Hollis asked if they would love and honor each other, they both said yes without hesitation. When Hawthorne kissed his new wife, it was tender and full of promise. Daisy felt like she was glowing from the inside out, lit up with happiness so intense it almost hurt. They spent one more night in Paso Robles, in a room at the boarding house that Mrs. Crawford had decorated with wildflowers. Hawthorne was gentle with Daisy, patient and careful, making sure she felt safe and cherished. She'd been nervous about the physical intimacy, but with him it felt natural, like an extension of the emotional connection they had already built. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his broad chest, listening to his heartbeat, and felt more at peace than she had in her entire life. The next morning, they left at dawn. Martha stood outside the boarding house waving goodbye, her face a mixture of sorrow and pride. Daisy waved back until her mother was just a speck in the distance, then turned to face forward toward the mountains and her new life. The journey took 2 full days, just as Hawthorne had said. They rode through rolling hills that gradually gave way to steeper terrain, through valleys of oak and pine, past streams that ran clear and cold. Hawthorne pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the land, about the animals that lived there, and the seasonal changes she could expect. He talked about his friends among the Chumash, about trade relationships and mutual respect. They'll probably come to visit within a week or 2, he said. Word travels fast in the mountains. They'll want to meet my new wife. What should I do? What's appropriate? Be yourself. Offer them food and hospitality. Listen more than you talk, at least at first. And don't be offended if they seem reserved. They've been hurt by white people too many times. Trust has to be earned. On the afternoon of the second day, they rounded a bend, and Daisy saw the cabin for the first time. It was tucked into a clearing surrounded by tall pines, with a view down the valley that took her breath away. The structure itself was solid and well made, built from logs chinked with mud and moss. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a small porch ran along the front. Behind the cabin, she could see an outhouse and a small barn for the horses. It's beautiful, she breathed. Hawthorne looked relieved. I'm glad you think so. I know it's not much compared to a townhouse. It's perfect. It's ours. He helped her down from her horse and carried her over the threshold, making her laugh. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. The cabin was a single large room with a sleeping loft above. There was a stone fireplace, a table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a large bed covered with furs and quilts. Everything was clean and orderly, which surprised her, until she remembered that Hawthorne had been living alone for years. A man survived by being organized. I'll need to build you more shelves, he said, setting her down, and maybe a separate storage room. I didn't think about needing space for a woman's things. I don't have many things, Daisy said, but I'd like to add some touches, make it feel like home, with your permission. Daisy, this is your home now. You don't need my permission to make changes. We're partners. She explored the cabin while Hawthorne tended to the horses, running her hands over the rough wood of the table, examining the books on the shelves, learning the space. There were signs of Ayana everywhere if she looked for them. A woven basket in traditional Chumash style, beadwork on a leather pouch, a grinding stone for acorns. Daisy felt no jealousy, only respect for the woman who had loved Hawthorne before her, who had made this cabin a home. That night, Hawthorne cooked venison stew over the fire, and they ate together at the table, talking and laughing. He told her about the surrounding land, about good places to pick berries and where the deer liked to graze. She told him about her childhood, about the first time she had realized she was different, about the years of trying to fit in. "You don't have to fit in here," he said. "You can be as strange as you want. The mountains don't judge. And you? I think your strangeness is beautiful. I like that you see the world in colors, that you sense things before they happen. It's a gift, like I said before. One you should use, not hide." Over the following weeks, Daisy settled into mountain life. It was hard, just as Hawthorne had warned, but it was also deeply satisfying. She learned to cook over an open fire, to preserve meat and vegetables, to recognize animal tracks and edible plants. Her body grew stronger from the constant work, and her mind grew calmer from the quiet and solitude. True to Hawthorne's prediction, a group of Chumash visitors arrived in the third week. There were 5 of them, men and women of varying ages. The eldest, a man named Cody, spoke some English. He looked Daisy over with sharp, assessing eyes. "You are the new wife," he said. "Yes, my name is Daisy. You look soft, city woman." "I'm learning. Hawthorne is teaching me," Cody grunted. "You will need to learn fast. Winter comes soon." But as the visit progressed, the Chumash seemed to warm to her. She offered them food and listened carefully when they spoke. When one of the women, a young mother named Mu, asked about her gifts, Daisy answered honestly. "I see emotions as colors," she said, "and sometimes I know things before they happen. My people thought it was madness, but I think it's just a different way of perceiving." Mu nodded seriously. "We have such people among our tribe. We call them seers. It is a sacred gift. No one in my world thought it was sacred." "Your world is young and foolish," Cody said bluntly. "Our world is old and wise. We know that some people are touched by the spirits to see more deeply. You are one such person." The acceptance brought tears to Daisy's eyes. These people, strangers from a completely different culture, understood her better than anyone in her own society ever had. When the Chumash left, they invited her and Hawthorne to visit their village. "You're welcome," Moose said. "You are family now." Winter came hard and fast. By November, snow blanketed the mountains and the temperature dropped until the inside of the cabin windows frosted over. Daisy and Hawthorne spent long evenings by the fire, reading, talking, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. They made love often, learning each other's bodies, building intimacy through touch and tenderness. Daisy found that her gifts were even stronger in the mountains, away from the noise and chaos of civilization. She could sense storms coming days in advance, could feel the moods of the animals around them, could predict when visitors were approaching. Hawthorne valued her insights, trusting her instincts without question. It was liberating to finally use her abilities freely, to be appreciated rather than feared. One night in December, as a blizzard raged outside, Daisy woke from a vivid dream. In it, she had seen a man stumbling through the snow, lost and freezing. She sat up, her heart racing. "What's wrong?" Hawthorne asked, instantly awake beside her. "Someone's out there, in the storm. He's going to die if we don't help him." Hawthorne didn't question or doubt. He simply got up and began dressing in his warmest clothes. "Show me which direction." They went out into the howling wind and blinding snow, Hawthorne carrying a rope tied to the cabin so they wouldn't get lost. Daisy led him on instinct, following the pull she felt. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, they found him, a young trapper half buried in a drift, unconscious but still breathing. They dragged him back to the cabin and spent the rest of the night warming him, forcing hot broth down his throat, rubbing circulation back into his frozen limbs. By morning, the storm had passed, and the young man, whose name was Peter, woke up confused and grateful. "I thought I was dead," he said. "How did you find me?" "My wife has a gift for such things," Hawthorne said simply. Peter stayed with them for 3 days until he was strong enough to travel. When he left, he swore he owed them his life and would spread word of their kindness. True to his word, other trappers and traders began to stop at their cabin, bringing news and supplies, offering trade and friendship. Daisy found herself becoming known as the woman who had seen, the mountain wife with the gift of knowing. Spring came slowly, the snow melting in stages to reveal the greening world beneath. Daisy had missed her monthly courses twice, and her body felt different, fuller, more tender. She suspected she was pregnant, but said nothing until she was sure. Finally, in late March, she told Hawthorne. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit up with joy, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I think the baby will come in October." "A child," he said wonderingly. "Our child." But there was sadness mixed with his joy, and Daisy knew he was thinking of Ayanna and the daughter he had lost. She took his face in her hands. "This doesn't replace them. This is something new, something ours. And I'm strong, Hawthorne. I'll be fine. You can't know that. I can. I feel it. My gift tells me this child is meant to be, that I'm meant to bring it safely into the world." He believed her, or at least he tried to. As her belly grew over the summer, he became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more, do less. It drove Daisy slightly crazy, but she understood his fear and tried to be patient. Moo visited several times, bringing herbs and advice from the tribal midwives. She examined Daisy's belly and pronounced the baby healthy and strong. "You will have a son," Moo said confidently. "I can tell by the way you carry him." Sure enough, in mid-October, as the leaves turned gold and red, Daisy went into labor. Hawthorne rode to fetch Moo and another Chumash woman, an elderly midwife named Cinta. They arrived quickly, and the two women took over with calm efficiency, boiling water and preparing the birthing area while Hawthorne paced outside. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, but Daisy had been right. She was strong, and the baby was healthy. When her son finally emerged with a lusty cry, the midwives cleaned him and placed him in her arms. He was perfect, with dark hair like his father and blue eyes that would likely change to brown. Hawthorne was allowed in, and he approached the bed with tears streaming down his face. "A son," he whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Daisy asked. "I'd like to use a name that honors both worlds," Hawthorne said. "Something English and something Chumash. Maybe Henry and the Chumash name Tuktu, which means hummingbird. Henry Tuktu Mackenzie." "It's perfect," Daisy said. The next years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. Henry grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved the mountains as much as his parents did. He learned to walk on the rough ground around the cabin, learned to swim in the creek, learned the calls of birds and the tracks of animals. Daisy and Hawthorne taught him both English and Chumash, wanting him to understand both aspects of his heritage. When Henry was 3, Daisy became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she delivered a healthy daughter in the spring. They named her Diana Rose, and she had Daisy's light coloring and Hawthorne's strong spirit. The Chumash called her Kenk, which meant dove. Life was full and rich. The cabin expanded as Hawthorne built additional rooms, a separate bedroom for the children, a larger storage area, a covered porch where they could sit in the evening and watch the sunset over the valley. Their trade relationships grew, and they became known as honest, reliable partners. Trappers brought them first pick of furs. The Chumash shared their seasonal harvests. Occasionally, someone from Paso Robles would make the long journey up the mountain to bring news or ask for help. Martha visited when the children were small, making the difficult journey with the help of a hired guide. She stayed for a month, marveling at the life her daughter had built. "You're happy," she said one evening, watching Daisy nurse Diana while Henry played at her feet. "Truly happy. I was wrong about so many things, but I was right to let you go." "You were right about the most important thing," Daisy said. "You taught me to survive. That's what I'm doing here, just in a different way than you imagined." Martha returned to Paso Robles with stories of her grandchildren and a lighter heart. She wrote letters regularly, and Hawthorne rode down to town twice a year to collect them and send replies. Martha lived another 8 years, long enough to see Henry grow into a bright, capable boy and Diana become a chattering toddler. When she passed peacefully in her sleep, Daisy grieved, but also felt gratitude. Her mother had died, knowing her daughter was loved and safe. As the years passed, Daisy's gifts grew stronger and more refined. She could sense weather patterns weeks in advance, could diagnose illnesses in people and animals, could find lost objects and lost people with uncanny accuracy. The Chumash came to call her Wise Eyes, and trappers spoke of her with a mixture of awe and respect. No one in the mountains thought she was mad. They saw her gifts for what they were, a natural part of who she was, as normal as brown eyes or curly hair. Hawthorne's love for her only deepened with time. He told her often that she had saved him, had brought him back to life when he thought his heart was dead forever. They worked side by side, partners in every sense, building a life that was uniquely theirs. They made love under the stars on warm summer nights, held each other through winter storms, raised their children with patience and joy. When Henry was 12 and Diana was 9, a representative from the territorial government arrived, asking Hawthorne to serve as a mediator between settlers and native tribes. His reputation for fairness and his relationships with the Chumash made him uniquely qualified. It would mean traveling occasionally, being away from home for days or weeks at a time. Hawthorne wanted to refuse, but Daisy encouraged him. "You can do good work," she said. "You can help prevent bloodshed and build understanding, and I'm not helpless. I can manage the homestead while you're gone." So Hawthorne took on the role, and Daisy proved more than capable. She ran the trapline when necessary, negotiated trades, protected the cabin from predators both animal and human. Her reputation as Wise Eyes actually helped. Many people were too intimidated or too respectful to cause trouble, and her gifts allowed her to sense danger and prepare accordingly. Life continued, rich and full. There were hard times, winters when food ran low, illnesses that swept through the valley, conflicts that required careful negotiation. But there were far more good times, festivals with the Chumash, family gatherings around the fire, quiet moments of connection and love. When Daisy was 45 and Hawthorne was 50, they became grandparents. Henry married a Chumash woman named Kana, and they had a son they named after his grandfather. Hawthorne held his grandson and wept, overcome with emotion. Diana, now a confident young woman of 22, showed no signs of settling down, preferring to explore the mountains and learn traditional medicine from the tribal healers. "She's like you," Hawthorne told Daisy, "strong and independent, not willing to fit into anyone's expectations." "I hope she finds what we found," Daisy said, "someone who sees her truly and loves her for it." "She will. She has time." They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. Hawthorne's hair was mostly gray now, and his face was lined with years of weather and work. But he was still strong, still vital, still the mountain man who had looked at a strange young woman and seen something worth loving. Daisy's own hair had threads of silver, and her hands were worn from work, but her eyes were as clear and knowing as ever. "Do you ever regret it?" Hawthorne asked. "Giving up civilization for this?" Daisy laughed. "Not for a single moment. That wasn't civilization. It was prison. This is freedom. This is life. Your mother thought you were touched in the head, and you said I touched your heart just fine. You still do, every single day." He took her hand, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and from the cabin behind them came the sound of their grandchild's laughter. The mountains rose around them, ancient and eternal, and Daisy felt the pulse of the land beneath her feet, steady and strong. She had spent her whole life being told she was broken, that her way of seeing the world was wrong. But here in the wilderness, surrounded by people who understood that different wasn't wrong, just different, she had finally found peace. She had found love. She had found herself. Hawthorne squeezed her hand, and she looked at him, this man who had saved her not by changing her, but by accepting her exactly as she was. His dark eyes were warm with love, and she felt the colors swirling around him, deep blues and greens, the colors of loyalty and devotion and unshakable commitment. "I love you," she said, though she told him this every day. I love you too, he replied, as he always did. My wise eyes, my heart. The sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars emerged in the darkening sky. Diana came out to join them, sitting on the porch steps with her knees drawn up, watching the night arrive. Henry and Kana emerged a moment later, the baby asleep in Kana's arms. They all sat together, this family that had been built from love and acceptance and the courage to live life on their own terms. Daisy thought about the young woman she had been, screaming at a dead snake in Paso Robles, her mother wailing about her touched head. That girl had been so lost, so afraid, so certain she would never find a place in the world. But she'd been wrong. Her place had been waiting for her all along, here in these mountains, in the arms of a man who saw her strangeness as strength, who loved her not despite her differences, but because of them. Tell us a story, Mama, Diana said, as she often did on these evenings. So Daisy told them about the first time she met their father, about the stable and the dance, and the moment she had decided to be brave. She told them about the journey to the mountains, about learning to live in the wilderness, about the kindness of the Chumash, and the beauty of a life lived authentically. She told them about Martha, who had been afraid but had ultimately found the courage to let her daughter go. As she talked, Hawthorne's hand remained in hers, warm and steady. The baby woke and cooed softly. Diana and Henry listened with smiles on their faces, having heard these stories many times but never tiring of them. These were the stories that defined them, that explained where they came from and who they were. When Daisy finished, Diana said, I want to find that kind of love someday, the kind that sees all of you and doesn't look away. You will, Daisy promised. When you stop looking and start living, it will find you. That's how it works. They sat together as the night deepened and the temperature dropped. Eventually, they moved inside, banking the fire and preparing for bed. Hawthorne and Daisy climbed to their loft, to the bed they had shared for over 20 years. They undressed and slipped under the quilts, and Hawthorne pulled her close, her back against his chest, his arm heavy and warm across her waist. Thank you, he whispered into her hair. For what? For trusting me, for coming to the mountains, for building this life with me, for giving me a reason to wake up every morning. You gave me the same, Daisy said. You gave me permission to be myself. That's the greatest gift anyone can give. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, their breathing synchronizing in the darkness. Outside, the mountains stood watch, eternal and unchanging. Inside, a family slept, warm and safe and loved. The years continued to pass. Henry and Kana had 2 more children, daughters who were bright and curious. Diana eventually fell in love with a trapper named James, a quiet man who respected her independence and supported her work as a healer. They married in a ceremony that blended white and Chumash traditions, with Hawthorne officiating and Daisy weeping happy tears. As Daisy and Hawthorne grew older, they slowed down but never stopped. They still took walks through the mountains, still sat on the porch watching sunsets, still made love with the tenderness of long practice. Their bodies might have been aging, but their connection remained young and vital. When Daisy was 68, she had a vision one night, clear and certain. She saw Hawthorne old and gray, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, living well into his 80s. She saw herself beside him, aged but healthy, her mind sharp until the end. She saw a legacy of love and acceptance, spreading out through generations like ripples in water. She woke from the vision with tears on her face, but they were good tears. She had been given a glimpse of the future, and it was beautiful. What is it? Hawthorne asked, waking beside her. Nothing, she said. Everything. I just saw how it all turns out, and it's good. We're going to be fine. Better than fine. He held her close, trusting her gift as he always had. Tell me. So she did, painting the picture in words, describing the years ahead. Hawthorne listened with wonder and gratitude, understanding what a gift this knowledge was. They would have time, so much time, to love each other and watch their family grow. The ending was not an ending at all, but a continuation, a legacy that would outlast them both. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and rose, they rose together to face another day. There was wood to chop and meals to cook and grandchildren to teach. There were stories to tell and love to share, and moments to cherish. There was life in all its messy, beautiful, complicated glory. Daisy Turner Mackenzie, once called Touched in the Head, had found her place in the world. She had found love and acceptance and purpose. She had built a life that honored who she truly was, without apology or shame. And in doing so, she had touched not just one heart, but many, spreading her gift outward like light. Hawthorne Mackenzie, the mountain man who had lived alone for so long, had found his partner, his equal, his heart. He had seen a strange young woman and recognized her strength, had loved her differences instead of fearing them. Together, they had built something extraordinary, a family and a legacy based on acceptance and authenticity. As they stepped out onto the porch that morning, hand in hand, the mountains welcomed them with their eternal presence. Birds sang in the pines, and the creek burbled in the distance. Somewhere nearby, their grandchildren were waking, ready to learn and grow and carry forward the lessons their grandparents had taught them. The Wild West was changing, civilization creeping ever closer to the wilderness. But here in these mountains, the old ways persisted. Here, a woman's gifts were honored, not feared. Here, love was defined by acceptance and respect, not by society's narrow expectations. Here, two people who had been called strange and wild and different had found each other and built a life of extraordinary beauty. And that, Daisy thought as she watched the sun climb higher into the perfect blue sky, that was the greatest gift of all. Not just to be loved, but to be seen. Not just to be accepted, but to be celebrated. Not just to survive, but to truly live. "Ready for another day?" Hawthorne asked, squeezing her hand. "With you?" Daisy smiled. "Always." They walked down the porch steps together, into the bright morning, into the life they had built, into the future that stretched before them like an open road. Behind them, the cabin stood strong, a testament to what could be built when two people committed to seeing each other truly. Around them, the mountains rose eternal, witness to a love story that had defied expectations and proved that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the courage to be yourself. The story of Daisy and Hawthorne would be told for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren and beyond. It would become legend among the mountain people, the tale of wise eyes and the mountain man, of a love that had transformed two broken people into something whole and beautiful. It would inspire others to seek authentic connection, to honor differences, to build lives based on truth rather than conformity. But on that morning, as they went about their daily work, they were simply themselves, a husband and wife, partners and lovers, best friends and soulmates. Two people who had found each other against all odds and had chosen every single day to keep choosing each other. The Wild West was full of stories of gunfighters and gold rushes, of lawmen and outlaws, of danger and excitement. But the truest story, the one that mattered most, was this one. The story of a woman who was told she was touched in the head and a man who said she touched his heart just fine. The story of how they built a life together in the mountains, raising children and grandchildren, spreading love and acceptance wherever they went. And in the end, that was the legacy that would outlast everything else. Not fame or fortune or adventure, but love. Pure, simple, unconditional love. The kind that sees every flaw and chooses to stay anyway. The kind that grows stronger with time instead of weaker. The kind that changes the world, one heart at a time. Daisy and Hawthorne Mackenzie lived that love every day, until their final breaths, decades later, when they passed within hours of each other, their hands clasped together as they had been for over 50 years. And even then, even in death, their legacy lived on in the people they had loved and the lives they had touched. The mountains remembered them. The Chumash told their stories around fires. The trappers and traders spoke their names with respect, and their descendants carried forward the lessons they had taught, spreading acceptance and authenticity like seeds on the wind. In a small town in California called Paso Robles, an old woman named Mrs. Crawford told visitors about the strange girl who had once stayed at her boarding house, the one who had seemed so lost and had found such extraordinary happiness. In the mountains, a cabin still stood, sheltering new generations, its walls holding decades of love and laughter. And somewhere in the space between earth and sky, two spirits danced together under eternal stars, finally free of all earthly constraints, their love continuing beyond the boundaries of life itself. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. That was their story. That was their triumph. And it would echo through the ages, a reminder that sometimes the things that make us different are the very things that make us extraordinary. That love is not about conforming to expectations, but about finding someone who sees your true self and says, yes, this, exactly this. She had been touched in the head, they said, but he had known better. She touched his heart just fine. And in the end, that made all the difference.